From the 18th century onwards, coal powered the steam engines that transformed industry, transport, and warfare. So how did cinema deal with coal mining?
We will speak about a rather difficult relationship between mining and cinema. But I will also introduce you to some films about mining, and especially one that managed to be quite prophetic.
The wealth and influence of nations such as Britain, France, and Germany were literally mined from the earth. Coal wasn't just a resource, it was a symbol of power, modernity, and the cost of progress. You could believe that the people who were digging for coal would have got a special status in these societies. This wasn't the case. They had to fight for it, and due to the importance of coal, they achieved some success in good times. Even though their job was hard and dangerous and they usually ruined their health, they were rarely seen and celebrated as heroes, unless accident happened. So how did cinema deal with coal mining? It can be said only a few films took place in the mining industry or deal with life of miners. Cinema has explored many professions and often boring professions like office work, yet coal miner films were a fraction of films set in offices, for example. The reasons are obvious. The dark, claustrophobic world of a mine is technically difficult to film and often limits narrative possibilities. Coal mining stories often deal with hardship, danger, and class struggle, topics less glamorous than Hollywood or even world cinema mainstream films tend to prefer. There are stories from dishwashers to millionaires, or people who find oil and become rich, so stories with a clear dramaturgic art, but coal miners are coal miners forever. This rather stagnant and conservative mindset makes coal miners rather unlikely heroes for films. Mining stories are inevitably tied to labor movements, strikes, and social injustice, themes that can polarize audiences. Sociologically, it has to be said that mainstream cinema's audiences became the middle class, and
For them, being a miner wasn't a desirable occupation.
so a common theme was often how to get out of mining, but as I said, the answer for many was coal miners are coal miners forever.
Toujours été mineur chez nous. La belle raison.
Usually there isn't a feel-good factor in mining. Who wants to be reminded that every time you switch on an electrical device, men have not only worked hard but often risked their life, at least damaged their health to mine coal? However, here in UK, some people have a nostalgia for these times where their parents or grandparents worked underground. With the rise of gas, coal lost its importance. As mining declined, the industry lost cultural visibility, especially in countries where it was once dominant. Which films are there dealing with mining? In the upcoming list, you will see that we are actually moving from newer to older films, and this for a reason. Billy Elliot was shot in 2000 and a huge hit, set in 1984 to 85. It is a coming-of-age story against the backdrop of the miners' strikes, a traumatic experience in British politics of the 80s. It's a film about economic change, so rather about what it means to lose your job, your community, and being forced to move into an uncertain future. The film was so successful that it is meanwhile even a musical, because the protagonist, the young Billy Elliot, actually aims not for a mining career but a dancing career. 4 years earlier, in 1996, Breast Off was telling the story about a brass band in a dying UK mining town. This film was a comedy and more light-hearted than Billy Elliot. The reason that Breast Off and Billy Elliot was made was that the exit from coal mining in the UK was a very painful and controversial one in many regards, and actually it was not about coal mining, but about how to get out of it. John Sayles' take on unionization and violence in 1920s West Virginia is powerful, but it is set in the 1920s. Coal mining is more a backdrop for a story about workers' organization. At the time of its making, when Western capitalist countries underwent a deunionization, the theme seemed to be rather against the stream. Which one was made 7 years after Heaven's Gate, a movie that depicted a similar critical topic in US history. Heaven's Gate famously ruined its production company. Which one was an independent film, was much less expensive, and still made only half of its cost at the US box office. However, As said, Read 1 isn't really dealing with coal mining and what it means to be a miner. So not surprisingly, we have to go back to the 30s and 40s at a time when coal mining had its importance, and here are the 3 main films about coal mining, all made by the very best film directors of their time. Number 3. How Green Was My Valley, 1941, John Ford. The film is in black and white, so there is no green. However, you might not notice this due to its beautiful photography, black and white photography that is. Ford's film is a lyrical, nostalgic look at the Welsh mining village seen through the eyes of a young boy. The film is set prior World War I, therefore allows for a nostalgic look back. It's about the community, the solidarity, pride and pain of working-class family bound together by the mine. We only see brief scenes in the mine. Otherwise, the movie takes place in the village, which was fully built in a Hollywood studio. Imagine a Welsh mining town in LA. At this time, films were shot in studios, but the already raging World War II might have been another reason for shooting the film in the USA. The film appeals to middle-class audiences with its focus on family. Maureen O'Hara's character manages to climb up socially, even though at a price. The narrator is destined to pursue a different career, and brothers leave to emigrate to the US. Unionization, exploitation, danger at work, and religious extremism isn't hidden or glossed over. There's already a sense that nothing is going to stay. The film's sentimentality softens the harshness of mining life. However, its visual beauty, emotional sincerity, and John Ford's iconic style makes it a classic. The film won the Oscar for Best Picture, outshining Citizen Kane that year. Looking at all 3 films, How Green Was My Valley is the most accomplished one, stylistically. But still, the other 2 films have very important qualities with regard to our topic. Number 2. The Stars Look Down, 1940, Carol Reed. Carol Reed's adaptation of 1935 published A.J. Cronin's novel is more explicitly political. Set in a northern English mining town, it contrasts the ambitions of the miner's son with the exploitation and tragedy that surrounds them. Similar to Ford's film, it spans several years. Reed's direction is sharp and compassionate, capturing the moral weight of social inequality. The film starts strong with the main conflict of the plot, an ignored risk of flooding. It shows the real consequences of strike, but then goes astray following the miner's son with a vicious femme fatale type of character, played by Margaret Lockwood, a character type we should see later in film noirs. We should also see later in a film called It's a Wonderful Life, a typical plot of village guys, where one becomes rich while the other follows his ideal and stays in the village. Only then we return to the village and witness the unfolding disaster. From my perspective, this melodramatic escapade gives the film a bit of a disjointed impression. Like John Ford's film, most of the sets were rebuilt in the studios, even the original locations were used. The political conflicts, the different interests between the miners, the owners, the non-miners in the village are portrayed very vividly. There's no sweetness as in How Green Was My Valley. The people are rough and live in order to survive. It was February 1940 when the film came out, 3 months after the Empire declared war to Nazi Germany, following Hitler's attack on Poland, and half a year before the Blitz campaign started. In this regard, it still can be seen as a pre-war movie. The film was a success at the British box office, certainly as well due to the reunion of the major film stars of British cinema, Michael Redgrave and Margaret Lockwood, after Hitchcock's A Lady Vanishes. Margaret Lockwood didn't want to have the adultery themes associated with her character. Fortunately, she didn't succeed. The problem from my perspective is that the strong focus on the relationship between Redgrave and Lockwood distracts from the real topic. Again, as already said, mining didn't seem to be a topic that would be attractive enough to cinema audiences on its own. The portrait of the mine owner is a very interesting one, someone who is arrogant and wants to teach the workers a lesson despite better knowledge, but also someone who goes into the mine himself and at the end tries to undo his failure. This is not black and white class struggle, where people are purely defined by their roles and status. I personally find this film so watchable because of the strong first and third act that portrays the mining community very convincingly. There were actually 2 TV series, a British and an Italian, shot in the 70s, based on the book. The 13th-part Granada series from 1975 covers a period from 1910 to 1932, and is more an epic costume drama set in the mining milieu. Now the third and from my perspective the most interesting film, Kameradschaft, 1931, G.W. Parks, and here's the film that is the oldest of these three, but astonishingly still the freshest of them due to its semi-documentary style. It is also the most political film, but with an unusual agenda as it seems. There's not the sentimentality of Ford, no nostalgia or love twist. The plot doesn't span decades or years. It is unabashedly contemporary, rather simple, and because of this still much more relatable. The film was made by the Austrian director G.W. Parks, who had already an illustrious career in silent movies. Kameradschaft is an early sound film where the camera has won back to a certain extent the mobility and dynamic it used to have in silent movies prior to the advent of sound. Of all three films about mining, Kameradschaft stands apart, not just as a mining story, but as a masterpiece of
humanist cinema.
Inspired by a real disaster in 1906, so prior World War I, when French and German miners worked together to save trapped French comrades, Parks' film transcends borders and politics to deliver a message of solidarity. The film portrays very impressively the situation at the border between France and Germany between the wars. The theme are economic pressure during the economic crisis post-1929, national interest and prejudices and mistrust. Characters are developed to reflect the variety of opinions and attitudes, and still at no point this film feels constructed. For the contemporary audiences this might have come as no surprise, and many might have found characters in the film that reflected their own views.
Nicht tanzen! Was Allemand? Was Allemand? So verstanden? Allemand? Nicht mit einem Allemand, hat sie gesagt. Ein Allemand tanzt ebenso gut wie ein Franzose, Fräulein.
Komm.
Ich kann mich doch hier nicht beleidigen lassen.
Lass die Frau, komm zum Kaninchen.
Laisse tomber.
Lass doch locker, Mensch.
Benimm dich, Mensch, im Ausland.
For nowadays audiences, it is a fascinating document to see how this works. What is called in German kleiner Grenzverkehr, small border traffic. There are other fascinating scenes like the miner showroom on the German side, something unthinkable to show in US or British cinema at that time. Perhaps uses the tools of early sound cinema with astonishing sophistication, mobile camera work, expressive lighting, and a dynamic sound design.
Nous vous remercions, monsieur, vous et vos braves compagnons, de venir nous aider à sauver nos camarades. Et nous souhaitons que parmi les vôtres,
The claustrophobic rescue scenes are breathtaking, a technical achievement for 1931. I don't want to spoil it, but in the same way as the Welsh town in How Green Was My Valley was fully purpose-built for the film, the coal mine is a stage set and very convincingly built. Reed's The Stars Look Down scenes in the mine look similarly convincing and were clearly influenced by Kameradschaft, even up to a point that similar shots were used. The mine scenes are very dark with a very dramatic expressionist lighting. It is fascinating that even though the darkness doesn't reveal much, there's still enough to see and to imagine. Made between the wars, Kameradschaft is a plea for international understanding in a Europe still scarred by World War I. In showing German miners risking their lives for French workers, Parks made an overtly pacifist statement, one that would soon be suppressed by the Nazis. The brilliance of the film is that it uses its characters to illustrate how German-French reality was. Two people so close and so distant. Prejudices, minority feelings, and everything that is the perfect material to be taken advantage of for divisive politics. Does this sound familiar? And we know there are other themes in connection with mining. Family, capitalist owners versus worker. The aim to change their career and leave mining. The class struggle element is an underlying theme and reveals in small moments and discussions. The main characters are young. On the German side, we don't see multi-generational families. Also, this appears much more modern than what is portrayed in the other two films. I don't know whether this was reflective of how the German miner scene was, or rather an aspect ignored in the interest of the story.
Anyway, in the poignant moment of this film,
The German miners reach a tunnel which separates the mine into a French and a German. So the border even exists underneath the earth. The implication is that the mine is actually one mine.
Arbeiter sind wir alle. Und Kumpel ist Kumpel. Aber warum halten wir nur zusammen, wenn es uns dreckig geht? Oder sollen wir ruhig zusehen, bis man uns wieder so weit verhetzt hat, dass wir uns im Krieg gegenseitig totschießen? Die Kohle gehört allen. Ob wir sie auf dieser Seite schippen oder auf der anderen Seite.
This sounds like a nice utopian dream that lacks any sense for political and economic realities. However, 19 years later, the French economist Jean Monnet sent a memorandum to the French Foreign Minister Schumann on May 1st, 1950. Just to remind you, May 1st is the day of labor in many European countries, in which he argued for the pooling of French and German coal and steel, production under a single independent high authority. When the newly elected West German Chancellor Adenauer, controversially as mayor of Cologne, already supported French-German reconciliation back in the 20s, received this proposal, he answered that this was a move he waited for 25 years. Following this memorandum, the so-called Montan Union was formed, out of which the European Union developed as we know it. The film's message is visionary, but it also warns against war, and when the idealistic speeches are held, we return to a rather somber act, when the border underneath is reinstated again. Films about coal mining were rare, not because the subject lacks drama, but because it confronts us with uncomfortable truths about labor, about the underbelly of our comfortable lifestyle, class, lack of education, and the cost of progress, even if it now seems to be very distant, serves as a reminder of on which foundation modern industrialization was built.